Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Mordian Glory video, and in today's episode I want to ask and answer one simple question. I want to ponder upon the topic of, is Warhammer 40k 10th edition fun, or is it a bit of a dumpster fire? You see, if you were to read online about 10th edition right now, and you were to read about all of the balance issues that it's got and all of the typos that we've seen in the indexes and how it's already needing to be FAQ'd and how from the very get-go the game was broken. I mean, straight away you had people that were finding problems with the core rules and with this and with that and with left and right, up, down, spinning in circles. It seems from every single angle, if you were to read about it online, that it's been an absolute nightmare launch. Even introductory games like Combat Patrol have had issues with balance, people saying that it's basically a waste of time, there's no point in playing it. And so top to bottom, if you were to solely get your knowledge about Warhammer 40k online, you would probably think that the game is in the worst state it has ever been in. In fact, whenever I go online and I read things on the Warhammer competitive subreddit, or I read things on other subreddits for specific factions, they often say things aren't working right now, things aren't very good. When I browse YouTube and I look at other channels, there's a lot of the time people saying, look, this game is just, it's a joke right now, it's really bad, it's not working. And you know, you've even got big channels like Auspex Tactics, who's a great content creator. If you've not checked him out, if you've not heard of Auspex Tactics in the Warhammer sphere, you're probably living under a rock somewhere. But if you haven't heard of him, go and check him out. He does a lot of content, high quality, and he's always pretty much at the tip of the spear when it comes to 40k news and stuff. Great channel. But even he recently put out a video, and this is kind of what prompted me to have a little think about this myself, which is, by the way, a sign of great content. I know it feels like it feels like this video is sponsored by Auspex. It's not in any way, shape or form, but a great piece of content I always think is one that gets people thinking, starts making them ask questions and starts getting them delving deeper into the topic, right? And so Auspex did this video where he was like, the top end of competitive 40k is a joke right now and how major things need to change. And I thought that was a really good video. And what it kind of made me realize, though, is I've been there, I've been absorbing information online, I've been marinating in the blogosphere, I've been marinating in the online environment. I've been soaking all of this information, all of this chatter in. Anyone read the third Gaunt's Ghost book, the chatter's been whispering in my ears, yes, the shield, that's kind of what's been going on. And so what's really interesting is my instinct about 10th edition is that it's not in a great place, and that the game is struggling right now, and we're seeing, you know, tournament player numbers go down. I've mentioned that in other videos, and it seems like it's been a massive own goal by GW. And you know, they're doing balance patches and they're trying to fix the game, and there's all sorts of things that are coming out. And maybe those balance patches will fix things, maybe they won't, but you know, we'll probably take a couple of weeks for us to really feel the impact of those, especially on the competitive scene. But when I actually think about this a little bit further, and when I take a step back, and when I stop reading the news as it was, when I stop looking at what's online, and when I actually just focus on my own experience of 10th edition right now, I have been having so much fun. I've been having an absolute blast. If you watch any of my battle reports, you'll feel that energy coming out across them. Since I've been doing 10th edition battle reports, my love for the game has increased more than it ever has been before. It feels like we've been back in 5th edition, which is one of my favorite editions, where vehicles felt like really tough, and you know, you could try out themed lists, and they won't always be super powerful, but they actually work. So you can try out like guard mechanized, you can try out like guard infantry waves, or you can have a hybrid army, or you can have tanks, and then also an airborne guard seems to be somehow back in business with all the cheap planes you can run from Forge World and everything. So it seems like there's a lot going for the guard, which is obviously my main faction, and it feels like 10th edition is actually really, really fun. And we've even had games against some of the bottom factions. We did a battle report against like Death Guard, and whilst the Death Guard didn't do so well in the battle report, there was definitely an inkling of how we could get them to work a little bit more, and that there was some play there, and that they could potentially be quite fun and everything. Which I know a lot of Death Guard players listening to this will probably disagree with me, but bear in mind, when I'm saying all this, it's very much from the casual perspective. And I think that's the key. I think that right now 40k is a game of two worlds separated by a thin veil, two parallel universes, as it were. It's a paradox, because at this one hand, 40k is in an awful state, unbelievably unfun. Going to tournaments will result in you getting absolutely seal clubbed by Eldar player after Eldar player. Custodies are running rampant. They're completely taking out most combat armies from the game because of army-wide fight first. And there's all these different mechanics right now which aren't doing the game any favors when you look at it from the absolute cutthroat perspective of top-tier play. You've got factions who are really pushed and have got much better than other factions, and obviously there's balance patches that are coming out and everything now, so some of that may change, but we're not talking about specific factions here. We should just clarify that we're talking generalizations. There are certain factions which are absolutely dominating other factions, and then on the other hand you've got the casual play where it's really fun. So how can 40k be both really unfun and be really fun at the same time? And I think this is where we're having a bit of a identity crisis within the 40k community right now. Because I think that people will always push for balance in 40k. That's what they want. But you're never going to truly balance the game, because this is an example that's often trotted out, but I will flog a dead horse. Look at a game like StarCraft, which has like 3 factions. They can never get those 100% balanced against each other. 40k has got 26 factions, so how the hell is GW ever going to balance all of that? So striving for balance is important, and it's definitely something we should be aiming for. But I think what is happening, and we've got close to it before with 9th edition, and I'll come back to 9th edition later on in the video. What's really interesting is that 10th edition is right now feeling really good on the casual scene. And for me, the example that I can hold up that really epitomizes this was I recently held a event, and it was a 44 person 300,000 point apocalypse game. There were about 150,000 points on each side, and there were 4 tables, each table with its own self-contained battle representing a biome on the planet, and it was the most fun I've ever had with 40k. And I didn't even play, I just watched the other people play, and I just TO'd for it. And it was amazing. It felt so good. It felt like this is peak 40k. This is how 40k should be. And in that moment, when I was having these epic battles and we were playing narratively, there was no primary or secondary missions. It was all very much narrative based. There were missions and stories and everything. There was a point to playing rather than just killing each other, let me be clear. But what really worked is that whilst I was just lost in the immersion of the game, whilst I was playing or watching people play the game, when I'm doing my battle reports and I'm just immersing myself in like a themed game, and these epic moments are happening, and you've got these duels, and you've got like Strachan going in like bashing apart like whole squads of Necron warriors, and you've got the Blood Pack trying to furiously like shoot down the planes, the sands, and you've got all these like cool things that are happening. When you're immersed in the moment of 40k, it is unbelievably fun. And I think this is, if I was to identify kind of like one thing that I think makes or breaks 40k, one thing that makes it both incredibly fun, but is also something that could make it incredibly unfun, is the player's immersion in the game. So when you are just focused on the game and what's happening in it, and when you're having these really badass moments like Strachan taking this down, or your Demon Prince like smashing apart a main battle tank, and all this kind of cool stuff happening, when you're allowing this story to sort of play out, even in a short space of time organically on the table, that's when people consistently have fun with 40k. And I know everyone has fun in different ways, so don't worry, we're going to come back to this in a little bit. Like, this is very much my personal experience and my personal explanation for why I think 40k is both incredibly good right now, but also incredibly bad. So when 10th edition has been really good for bringing back that immersion, if you let the game, if you have to let the game draw you in. You have to just go with the flow and let the narrative play out and let certain things happen. So a good example of when I've not done this is in a battle port that I did when it was Imperial Knights versus my Met Guard. There's a point in that battle where an Armiger wanted to charge a Chimera, and what happened was the Armiger had to go over a tall bit of battlefield debris. Unfortunately, it was like higher than 2 or 3 inches. So it had to take into account this little buggy thing, this little bit of just scatter terrain that we'd put on the board, and therefore it failed the charge. Now, we played those rules technically, and that had been the correct move. But both me and my opponent came away from that unsatisfied because the epic moment hadn't happened. It had led to a negative game experience. And so it was a bit of a pisser in the battle port, frankly. Then look at the time when, more recently, my blood pacts were taken on Scions, and in that battle, my pseudo Strachan, because I was in the blood pact, so it wasn't really Strachan, it was a chaos equivalent. He punched a Valkyrie out of the sky. It was really cool. It was epic. Now, I actually had the firepower to blow that Valkyrie out of the sky. I didn't need to punch it out of the sky, but I thought it would be cooler and more fun to have Strachan try and take it out. And he managed it. He managed to pick the plane up, which was great. Now, it wasn't the most tactical move, and it wasn't the best move, but it allowed the immersion to happen. It allowed the game to happen. It made a really cool spectacle. And even though my opponent had just lost one of his really important flyers in that game, there was no feel bad seas. My opponent, Commander James, turned to me and was like, that was epic. That was so cool seeing him like punch it out of the sky. And he's not played 40k. He didn't play 9th edition. He skipped 9th edition because he said it wasn't for him. And we've got back into it with 10th edition. He's been having a blast pulling his pure Scion army out. And that's another example of the kind of player that is getting back into the game. People that are really enjoying 10th edition, the kind of people that keep saying to me, I'm loving it, I don't get what all the negativity is about. James got into 40k with 8th edition, and when he started, he just wanted a pure Scion army. And this kid must have the biggest Scion army in existence. I kid you not. All right, he must have, if it's less than 10,000 points of Scions and Scion themed guard, I would be surprised. Okay, it's box after box. He's got fleets of Tauroxes, Taurox primes. He's got an armada of flyers. He's got hundreds and hundreds of Scions and converted light infantry that can either be used like Scions or Catachans or some other kind of like infiltrator. He just loves the idea of like special forces. Despite all of the guard he has, he only owns like 1 Lehman Russ because he doesn't really like heavy armor. He likes fast moving like operators, that kind of thing, right? Now, in 8th edition, he could build the army and he could play it, and we played a series of battle reports where it was my G-Silicult versus his Scions, and it was a really good like narrative story that we like built up, and Longbeard veterans of the channel will be like, oh yeah, I remember those like GSC versus Scion games. Oh, I remember like how cool it was, that story developing over the course of the whole edition where we played like a dozen battle reports against each other. And 9th edition was all about the competitive play, and was way more balanced. But a lot of these more casual players stepped back, and because it felt a bit sterile to them, and I want to talk a little bit more about that later on. But 10th edition, I've been just saying to James like, oh yeah, you can run your pure Scions again. He's like, oh yeah, but what about all the messy detachments and everything? It's like, no, that's all gone. He's like, oh, so what if I want to run like 2 blobs of guard and then like 4 like squads of Scions? And I'm like, well, you could do that. You just need to make sure your warlord is a Scions. They need to be led by the Scions. He's like, oh, but I don't need to take like 2 different detachments and this kind of stuff. And I was like, no. He's like, what about CP generation? Oh, you just get 1 every turn. Just builds up, just ticks up. He's like, wow, that's really, really cool. And he's like, what about the missions? They're like, well, we can play a bit of Only War if you like. And he's like, what's that? Like, we each take it in turn to place some objectives down, and then we just fight over those objectives. It's like, oh, that's kind of cool. Of course, we can place them wherever we want. And yeah, you can place them where you want, but in some cool places that might represent important locations around the battlefield. And he's like, oh, that's really cool. Yeah, even though it's not the right thing to, I'm going to put one on top of this hill. I'll put one on top of this building. Yeah, they're not really near me or in a place I can really get to, but it doesn't matter because that feels like it would be a key location. So let's mark it as a key location. And so it's this kind of, I know I've been going off on a tangent, but it's this kind of play which has really drawn people back in. And I think the whole point of this, like this rambling, long tangent example that I've been talking about is 10th edition is fun when you allow players to start getting into the game and immersing themselves into the game. And it's not fun when the fourth wall is broken, when the suspension of disbelief is pulled out from underneath them. And I think that is where the problem with tournaments can lie. And I love tournaments. You guys know I do lots and lots of tournament reports, and I intend to go to lots and lots of tournaments in 10th edition. But if the game is so unbalanced that there is very little scope for people to have those epic moments, to have those fun moments, to forge the narrative, to feel like they're playing with their dudes, then as a whole, the competitive scene suffers, and as a whole, the game suffers. Because if you go to a tournament, and yeah, you're bringing the best list that you can bring with your favorite faction, so you've not jumped on any particular bandwagon, but then all you do is just go up against poorly painted army of, you know, Elder or Custodes or Knights or Necrons, just poorly painted faction of the month, and it's just the same thing, similar lists every single time, then that's very immersion breaking. And when you're looking at the board and it's just a bunch of ruins on perspex basis, sure, technically that kind of terrain is vastly superior, and it's really good for trying to like balance out the game, stop people from getting shot off the table in one turn. Of course, in many ways it's necessary, but it doesn't really draw you into the game, does it? It doesn't really immerse you in the battle that's taking place. Rather than you playing a battle and conducting the maneuver of troops and trying to come up with battle plans, stuff like that, what you're doing is playing a game. Do you know what I mean? You're just playing a game. And if that game isn't balanced, then that game isn't fun. You see, there's the difference. If you're playing a narrative scenario and the terrain is really narrative, and from the beginning everyone's getting immersed in the story that's taking place, casual play, maybe you've got 500 points of guard doing a last stand against 1,000 points of Tyranids, that's okay because people know what's happening in that, so it doesn't need to be balanced because it's just more about becoming immersed. And if you're playing a 2,000 point versus 2,000 point game, it doesn't really matter if it's not balanced, if it's casual, or less balanced, if I should say, if it's casual, because as long as the terrain is there and as long as both players allow certain things to happen that may not be the most tactical things, but they allow for cool moments to happen, it doesn't matter because both people are coming away with awesome stories to tell. But in the competitive, there's no room for that. It is the best versus the best. It is this is the terrain every single time. There's no scatter terrain, there's no trying to like make the board look alive or anything like that, make it look realistic. No, all of that goes out of the window, and instead what you're left with is a game which feels like a game rather than a story. Now, that's not to say that great enjoyment cannot be derived from playing a game. And that's also not to say that competitive play isn't fun, because it's not. Competitive play can be some of the most satisfying. It can be some of the best. Some of my favourite games of all time have been at absolute shark tanks of tournaments. But they've always been good. The stories have always been fun when it's felt like both sides had a decent chance against each other. And so competitive play is completely black and white. It's a story of great highs and it's a story of terrible lows. Great highs at a competitive event are when you and your opponent are neck and neck. It's play and counter play. It's move and counter move. You've got a plan, they've got a plan. And it's whoever can just finally clinch, maybe make the right move, or someone just makes this tiny mistake and you're able to capitalize on it. Maybe you've got a good plan and you execute it and it just works. That can be amazing and satisfying. And also, even if the game's a little unbalanced and not in your favor, being able to overcome the odds or getting close, maybe you don't quite manage, if you get close to overcoming the odds, that can be amazing as well, because it was an uphill battle, it's an underdog story, brilliant. But when you go into a game, a competitive game, and there is no point in rolling a dice, because your opponent has got just a complete dominant meta faction and army list, and you've got the best list you can muster from your collection and from your faction, but there's literally no point in rolling a dice. It's a bad matchup. How many times have we heard this? Oh, it's a bad matchup for my list. Well, that creates a negative game experience, and that is when you get these instances where people just go, oh well, yeah, I matched up against let's say you vote. Let's say you're using voted. Oh yeah, I matched up against Imperial Guard, and all he did is just slow down all my units with his artillery. It just blew me off the table, and it wasn't very fun. It's like, yeah, that's not very good, is it? That was just a bad matchup. That was just no point in playing. That's just an example, by the way. Guys, don't read into it too much. I'm just using it to try and illustrate a point. I'm sure there's a better example of bad matchups. World Eaters versus Custodians. That's generally a bad matchup, right? But my point is that if you get into these situations where people just go, oh, well, I rolled off, whoever got first turn wins the game. Oh, I didn't get first turn, oh, I lost the game. That's when competitive play, I feel, is at its worst. And when you have an edition like 10th edition, where it has started off with huge disparities between the top and huge disparities between the bottom, that is when people start quitting, that's when people start leaving, and that's when people stop playing it. And the big problem you have is that if you leave that kind of situation to fester for too long, it only gets worse. It rarely sorts itself out, with the one exception being Gene Stilical. They always come out of the gate incredibly strong, and then 3 months later everyone's learned how to handle them. But when you've got something where one faction is so far ahead of the other, it just means that what happens is more and more people jump onto that faction. People chase the bandwagon, people jump on the bandwagon. And so what happens is that the problem just gets worse and worse and worse, until you have factions which aren't even being represented on the competitive scene. People just literally aren't turning up with certain armies, and you've got just event after event which just feels like it's the same 4 or 5 factions just constantly smashing each other, constantly playing, and anyone else that turns up almost feels like an outsider, almost feels like there's no point in them turning up. Why the hell did you turn up with that army? Not very good. But as always, all of this is just like my opinion, and it's probably a very flawed one as well. So let me know what you're thinking down in the comment section below. Which parts of 10th edition do you think are good, and which bits do you think don't work? Are you a competitive player? Are you enjoying the scene right now? Are you a casual player? Are you enjoying it? Have you moved from one scene to the other? Get it all down there in that comment section. If you've enjoyed today's video, don't forget to smash that like button, and of course, subscribe to never miss an episode. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure, and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian Glory Hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members, and Patreons. You guys are amazing. Truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordy and Glory full-time without the incredible and generous support of my members. So thank you guys so much. And last, but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier patrons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the Call of Duty. So a massive thank you to Bonbonvert, Ken Starr, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, and August Varney. Thank you guys from the bottom of my heart. You are incredible. Your generosity is truly humbling, and I could just say it 1,000 times over and over again. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Hope you all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.